Lee Spencer's interview.
Any of that.
Yeah, that was pretty good stuff.
On our Bench Racing Hotline
Another good interview coming up here.
Dan Beaver, who will tell us all there is to know about how to get in and out of Kentucky Speedway. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing okay, but I don't have a helicopter, so I'm not sure I can help with the Kentucky Speedway.
That's no excuse. You still have to make picks. Dan, of course, is the NASCAR fantasy racing expert for NASCAR.com and for YahooSports.com, and writes columns for both, and is a semi-regular contributor here at OnPitRow.com and On Pit Row. Dan, thanks again for being with us. Okay, we're going to Kentucky. Mile-and-a-half track, a little flatter than some, a little more banked than others. Tell me what you think about Kentucky.
Where the cookie cutter tracks are concerned, the similarly configured mile-and-a-half courses, it's the flattest. So there's a little bit of a curveball there, but I don't think anybody knows exactly what the pitch is going to look like anyway. Since we're only going there for a second time, I've used this phrase a couple of times this week. We're going to the roots of racing, NASCAR's racing, but the roots are tangled. Because it's a flat cookie-cutter course, because it's only the second time we've been there, you would think it's just not terribly predictable yet, or we don't know exactly what to look for. It's going to behave a lot like the other mile-and-a-half tracks, but it's going to be enough different that some fresh faces get to poke their way up to the front. And I think that's what we saw last week with Kyle Busch. Winning, David Rudiman finishing second. I think David Reagan was somewhere in the top 10. It wasn't your normal-looking top 10 for this type of track, and a big part of the reason for that was some of these drivers didn't have preconceived notions, and they just went out there and learned how to do it quicker than some of their counterparts.
So, Dan, what will you look for this week as far as, picking the players on your team, so to speak? Are you looking at practice speeds, qualifying, last year's results? Where do you go?
I think practice is always the best thing to look at. If you can find drivers who have sustained 10-lap average runs that put them near the top, they're going to be strong during the race for the most part. If you can wait for the games that allow you to wait until practice is completed, that's the way to go. Some of the games, Yahoo included, make you make choices before a lot of that's in the books. So you got to base your picks based on something. And there are comparable tracks to Kentucky. Chicagoland's relatively flat. Kansas is relatively flat. Auto Club is flat. And at 1.5 to 2 miles, I think those are the three best comparatives that we're going to have. Michigan would be if it hadn't just repaved. So if you're looking at a driver's record on Michigan prior to this year, that's going to give you some data to go by. Those are the tracks that I'm using as comparatives this week. And then you've got to roll the dice a little bit on some of the drivers that you're not fully convinced of.
How are you looking in, if you're looking at Yahoo, your A's, your B's, and your C's, who do you like in each group?
In A, it's hard to go against Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth. Even with the recent announcement for Kenseth, I don't think it's going to slow him down any time in the near term. So long as he's got the points lead and so long as the team's competitive, so long as things are going well, in other words, they're going to have the same chemistry that they've always had. If things start to go bad, then you can start to worry about them a little bit later in the season. But those two drivers both have finished 11th or better in all four of the cookie-cutter races this year. So I think they edge themselves to the top of the list in Group A. In Group B, you've got another couple of drivers who finished 11th or better. Actually, these guys have finished 10th or better in the four cookie-cutter races. Biffle has swept the top 5. Earnhardt has swept the top 10. So they're pretty easy picks to handicap near the top. Starting them could be a different issue because they've been so strong throughout the season. They are either exhausted or almost exhausted from a number of players' rosters. But you've got enough dark horse picks that I think that's not going to be critical.
All right, if you have to pick one guy, who's your one guy that you're going to take this week at Kentucky?
Jimmy Johnson. He would have a perfect streak of top 5 finishes if not for his pit road mistake in Charlotte, and I don't think he'll make another mistake this week. So I think he's a good bet to win. If he doesn't win, I think he'll finish in the top 3.
All right, Dan, before we let you go, I want to ask you one real quick question about this Kenza thing. You said that you wouldn't let it affect you picking him this week necessarily, but at what point, if Matt Kenseth runs off, let's say 3 races where he finishes out of the top 20, do you start playing? Does that start to play more into your prognostication because of this silly season thing, or would you just normally not like that much anyway?
I'd drop him like a hot stone.
Really? Okay.
If that happens. Yeah, it's got to play in. We don't know what's going on in the hauler.
Right.
Even the guys that are at the track every week don't know what's going on inside the hauler. But if he starts to lose his momentum, the chemistry is going to be right behind it. No matter how professional all these guys are, it's impossible to stay positive in the best of circumstances. And he's not looking at the best of circumstances for the rest of the season. I don't think we need to talk about it yet, but I do think it needs to be in the back of fantasy owners' minds. And like you said, if he rattles off 2 or 3 bad finishes, even if they're not his fault, then it could be time to stop thinking of him as a must-have.
Well, that makes sense. Dan, thanks again for your time this week. Everybody, make sure you follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Read his fantasy racing previews for the Kentucky race at NASCAR.com and YahooSports.com. Of course, we'll replay the highlight of this interview on our website and on the Facebook page, and the link to that will be in our weekly newsletter. So if you're not subscribing to the newsletter, do that. Dan, thanks again. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks, man.
Thank you. I'll be here.
All right, Dan Beaver, one of the best, absolutely, probably the best fantasy racing writer out there, and we get him every 2 weeks.
All right, and who do you take?
I'm taking Kyle Busch. He won last year.
Okay.
Who are you taking?
I'm taking Junior. The resurgence of